Κώστα, έτοιμοι? Καλησπέρα σας όλοι. Πριν ξεκινήσουμε, μπορείτε να σηκωθείτε όλοι και να επικρατήσουμε για 1 λεπτό την απόλυτη σιωπή ως ένδειξη τιμής για τα θύματα της γενοκτονίας. Καθίστε. Greetings everyone, good evening and welcome to the Greek Centre. Let me begin by paying my respects to the true owners and custodians of this land, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay homage to their elders past, present and emerging. Welcome to this annual event presented by Pondιακή Εστία in conjunction with the Greek community of Melbourne's History and Culture Public Seminar Series. Tonight's speaker is the omnipresent Dean Kalimniou, and he'll be speaking on the topic of William Lloyd and the liberation of Pontus. This seminar is also in memory of Olga Sarinidis and under the auspice of the Australian Federation of Pontian Associations and the Pontian Coordinating Committee for the Greek Genocide. But before I introduce the topic, I would like to invite on stage to say a few welcoming words and convey a message. Simela Teriadis Stamotopoulos, President of the Australian Federation of Pontian Associations of Australia. Simela, can you come to the front, please?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Christos Anesti. I would also like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather today and pay my respect to their elders past and present. I'm pleased to be attending what has become an annual collaboration between Pondιακή Εστία and the Greek community of Melbourne, integrated into the annual commemorative events coordinated by the committee headed by Romasiakou. Notably, it has become an established yearly presentation by Dean Kalimniou, so established that not even a global pandemic could interrupt his contribution. Last year, during lockdown, Dean continued the tradition by giving an online presentation on Vasilios Vissarion, the cleric and famed Greek scholar born in Trapezunda. I'd like to sincerely thank Dean for his efforts and his willingness to contribute to the Pontian commemorative events and for his continued intellectual contribution to the wider Greek community of Melbourne. The topic today of today's speech, William Lloyd and the liberation of Pontus, is intriguing. It seems that there is still much to be discovered about the Australian connection to the plight of the Christian population of Anatolia who became victims of the genocide. In turn, such information adds to the inexhaustible body of evidence relating to the systematic destruction of the Armenian, Assyrian, and Greek population of the region. I like to end with a quote which is also used as lyrics. Pontians often use song and dance to express their pain and sorrow. It sums up the immensity and simplicity of events that unfolded in Pontus. Πολλά να λέω κι μπορώ, κι ο λίγα κι κανίταν. Τα τέρτεμ όλα να λέω, μερών και κυτελίνταν. I'm unable to say a lot, but a little will not suffice. To tell all my sorrows will take till morning, and even then I will not have finished. Thank you.
Thank you, Simela. Well, what can I say about our speaker tonight, ever-dependable polymath Dean Kalimniou? I've lost count of how many times he's delivered this seminar. Dean's full-time occupation is delivering seminars on any topic imaginable under the sun. No topic is too big or too small for him to digest. He relishes a challenge. And occasionally, in between preparing, deliberating and researching for these seminars, he handles the odd legal case that can put some food on the table for his family. I'm sure, at least that's the impression I have. Actually, he does. I do see him Saturday mornings at Greek school, so he's doing that as well. So I'm sure tonight will be no different. He's made an art out of making something out of nothing, out of dragging things out of obsolescence, of remaking and remodeling figures, facts, and personalities, and bringing them back out of obscurity. And this is the essence of tonight's seminar: William Lloyd and the Liberation of Pontus. I'm sure most of us, and even those allegedly better read amongst us, were probably wrong-footed with this topic. I'm sure the common knee-jerk reaction when the email announcement went out was, "Ποιος το διάλογο ήταν ο William Lloyd?" It definitely was mine. Πάλι αδιάβαστος με έπιασε και δεν είναι η πρώτη φορά. Dean, I'll welcome you to the podium to enlighten us once again.
Thank you, Nico. Thank you, κυρία Ρώμα Σιάκου, for your sponsorship of tonight's event. Ποντιακή Εστία για τη συνεργασία που έχουμε τόσα χρόνια. Simela, πρόεδρε of the Federation, for being here και για την προσφώνηση. Thank you very much. And I'll start speaking in English and I'll say this. I object to the word Pontian genocide. I don't think that's correct. I don't think we should be saying the word Pontian genocide. We need to let that go. We have an Armenian genocide. We have an Assyrian genocide. Why do we specifically point to a part of the Greek world and say that that is a genocide when the genocide took place all over Asia Minor and Eastern Thrace? It's a Greek genocide. We are the only people who are victims of the genocide which was perpetrated by the Ottomans and the Kemalists after them, who have 3 days, 3 separate dates to commemorate the genocide. April for Eastern Thrace, September for most of Asia Minor, and 19th of May for Pontus. Considering that the motivation and the modus operandi of the Ottomans and the Kemalists for each one was the same, this makes no sense. What it does is it marginalises, in my opinion, the Pontians. It presents them as something foreign, something different, something extraneous from the body of the Greek community, and that is the reason why Greeks in general don't really feel passionately about the genocide, because that is something that just happened to the Pontians in their view. By naming it the Greek genocide, we bring it back, και το κάνουμε εθνική υπόθεση, something which belongs to all of us, which is what the Armenians and the Assyrians are doing. I'm prefacing my talk with these remarks because if you go out like I've done in the past, and the good people from Podiaki Esti and the Federation will be able to tell you this when they're lobbying, talking to politicians, and you say, oh, but the Pontians, no one knows outside of Greece who the Pontians are. But the minute that you say that something happened to the Greeks, and then you can say the Greeks of Pontus, or the Greeks of Smyrna, or the Greeks of wherever, you've got their attention, it's relatable. Now, making something out of nothing, as Nico said, tonight I want to talk about an Australian who actually knows or knew where Pontus was. Probably the only one of his time, and very early on. And go out now into the world at large, here in post-COVID or still COVID Melbourne, and talk about Pontus, this magical land nestled between Kolchida, the Golden Fleece, and the Pontic Mountains and the Black Sea, and talk about how the fact that its major city, Trapezunda, was not only the place where Xenophon, who classical scholars of the old days would know, he arrived from there after a massive great trek through the Middle East and said the famous words, Thalata, Thalata. And it's also the terminal end of the Silk Road. The Silk Road starts in Beijing and finishes where? In Trapezunda. Something that not many people know. Now, all these things we don't know because... Wrong way. Right way? Wrong way. That way, there. That's what we think Pondians are. People that wear funny hats and a lot of spheres, a lot of bullets and knives, and look particularly fierce, or in this case, self-conscious. And that's actually a traditional Georgian costume, but we won't go there. So, for most Australians, Pontus registers not at all. Don't know anything about Pontus, except possibly the ones who know something about this guy, Mithridates, the unpoisonable king who took on the might of Rome and almost won, but then lost. And yet, at the time of great crisis, at the time of unspeakable suffering, and we're talking of the genocide that took place in the Pontic regions, there was one Australian who did all that he could to raise awareness of the plight of the Greeks, the wretchedness of their situation, the injustice of their situation, even to the point where he was willing, according to record, to give his life for this cause. And he got to the stage where not only did he believe that we need to protect the Pondian population from the Ottomans, but he actually started advocating in public, look, we got to not only protect these people, we got to give them a country. So William Lloyd, who I'm going to talk about tonight, was possibly the first Australian ever to advocate the liberation and independence of Pontus. And there he is, and you would have seen him in the online adverts, and that's the only picture we have of him. He was born in 1875 in New Zealand, where all good Australians come from, and migrated here at an early age, and he claimed to have been present in Constantinople during the Hamidian massacres of 1896 to 1897. And this was possibly a prototype of the genocide that was to follow. It was the time when the Ottomans of the Armenians, of the Ottoman Empire sought civil reform, they sought equality, they sought better conditions for themselves, they sought less discrimination. There was a war that had been fought between Turkey and the Ottoman Empire. As a result of that, there was a treaty that was signed in which it was incumbent upon the Ottoman Empire to give 5 eastern provinces of that empire autonomy under Armenian self-rule. That was something that the Ottomans did not want to do, and therefore there were a lot of massacres that took place all around the Ottoman Empire. And tens of thousands of Greeks were also caught up in this and killed as well, according to scholars, especially in the eastern regions, the southeast of Turkey, where we don't really talk about the Greeks of that region. That's something we need to discuss another time. Now, we don't know why. Well, that's a photo of the Hamidian massacres right there. Now, I think we don't know why William Lloyd was there. We don't know how he got there. All we know is that, according to his testimony, he was there, he saw this, and we need to say something more about the Hamidian massacres because it affected him in a really profound way. We're looking at casualties of 100,000 to 300,000, 50,000 orphan children, and the massacres are named after the Sultan Abdul Hamid, also known as the Butcher. And yeah, they were directed at Armenians, but soon people lost control, and Assyrians were also targeted, Arab Orthodox were also targeted, Greeks were also targeted, basically anyone that was Christian. If you were not a Muslim, it was fair game. And the massacres began around about 1894 in the Ottoman interior, and then they became widespread, and the majority of the murders took place, as we say, between 94 and 96. They began tapering off in 1897 because the international community got wise to what was going on and started complaining to Abdul Hamid, what the hell is that? Yeah? And what really caused the thing to stop is the fact that telegraphs, news reports around the world, public opinion became an issue in a way that never existed before that. It received extensive coverage in the West, being Europe and North America. And of course, we know that the second Armenian genocide took place when? During the First World War and heightened after the Gallipoli landing, and we don't really know where Lloyd was at that time. Notice one thing about this picture. 1889, so periodic massacres underneath. Massacres of Armenians in Iraklion, Crete. So we're not talking just Asia Minor. Wherever there were Armenians, they were deliberately being targeted and killed. And this is something that, according to his account, William Lloyd saw, because he was in Asia Minor as a young child, and that affected him. Now, William Lloyd is a shadowy figure, and he first makes his appearance in the Australian print media in 1917, in January, and he's writing to the Melbourne newspaper, the Argus, under the sobriquet Philhellene Lloyd. And he writes an article where he's protesting against the treatment of Greek Australians during the wartime. And we know that Greece's Germanophile king, Constantine, refused the Allies, or we should say the Entente, otherwise we're being anachronistic, entreaties to enter the war on their side. And instead, Greece was declared neutral. The Greek Australians were, as a result, treated, the ones that were here, as enemy aliens. And many were interned, so they were locked up. Many were subjected to verbal and physical abuse. We know, for example, that in 1916, the Australian government responded by placing a special prohibition on the entry of Greeks and Maltese people to Australia. And that's bizarre because Malta was part of the British Commonwealth, but you know, they're all dark and they speak Wog, so lock them up, yeah? And that prohibition was actually not lifted until 1920. And there were a number of anti-Greek outbursts all around Australia at the time as a result of King Constantine's neutral stance, and often instigated by Australian soldiers on leave. Australian soldiers are fighting hard over there. They come here, they see these people who they consider they're traitorous, and they create problems. So during these outbursts, Greek shops, Greek cafes, because these were the businesses the Greeks were involved in, were badly damaged and destroyed, with the Kalgoorlie, famous or infamous rather, Kalgoorlie riots being an example, and the ones in Boulder as well. And we know that this neutral stance of King Constantine created the national schism which divided Greece. Bulgaria entered the war against Serbia in conjunction with what Germany and Austria-Hungary were doing, and Venizelos pushed through Parliament a call for conscription, he being the Prime Minister of Greece at the time, for those of you watching via Facebook or Zoom, and I love Facebook and Zoom. I love Facebook even more, Nico will tell you. And I love the fact that our Greek community has morphed from a physical presence to a digital presence, and now is slowly transitioning back to a data presence. And that's why everything sounds garbled tonight, everyone watching from home. It's because we still haven't figured out how physical data can be now metamorphosized into digital data and vice versa. There's no schism involved in that though, of course. The schism is with Venizelos and the fact that he wanted to enter the war in the side of the Allies. He received promises that if he did so, Cyprus would be joined onto Greece. Cyprus was held by the British at the time, and also, of course, the fact that tranches of Asia Minor were also promised to Venizelos. He was willing to go. The king said no. Venizelos, there's the king, looking very German with his Kaiser-like moustache and his medals, King Constantine. Venizelos goes to Thessaloniki and sets up the National Defence Government, Tis Ethnikis Aminas. King Constantine stays in Athens, and there is a schism. There are two governments in the country, and they are effectively at war with each other. Venizelos allows the Allies to use the port of Thessaloniki to fuel, to transport soldiers to the various fronts. He commits soldiers from the areas under his control to the war effort. And Piraeus is blockaded and bombarded by the Allies. Constantine abdicates on the 11th of June 1917, and his second son, Alexander, takes over. There we see Constantine is perplexed, and why wouldn't you be? So all this thing is going on while Greeks in Australia are being locked up, taunted, mistreated, and the whole of the Australian press here is very anti-Greek. So William Lloyd does this. He takes great pains to point out that, according to him, Greeks are among the most law-abiding and industrious of our citizens. And he writes several articles in the paper supporting Greeks, telling the Australians what good people we really are when left to our own devices. And soon after, assuming the title of journalist, decided he wanted to become a journalist, he embarked for military service. He was discharged in Cairo at the end of the war in February 1919. And finishes up in Cairo and decides to go to Jerusalem, where he participated in the ceremonies of Orthodox Holy Week, and then becomes Near East correspondent for the Liverpool Courier and travels from Syria to Turkey in order to report on the Greek army's Asia Minor campaign, which is just beginning. So this is a contemporary picture of Holy Week in Jerusalem at the time. And as you can see, it's rather a war-ravaged Jerusalem, having been liberated from the Ottomans not so long before. There they are. So he's a war correspondent. He's reporting on the Asia Minor campaign, which is taking place where? In Asia Minor. We know that the Greek army had a mandate to occupy the zone of Smyrni. They were supposed to do that for 5 years and police it, after which time there was going to be a plebiscite. And that plebiscite was going to determine whether the inhabitants were to remain as part of the Ottoman Empire or whether they were going to join on to Greece or otherwise determine their fate. What we understand from the demographics is that there was a majority of Greeks and Armenians living in the zone of Smyrni, and probably the vote would have gone in favour of union with Greece. There are Ottoman guerrilla movements. There are Ottomans who don't accept this. The minute that the Greek soldiers landed in Smyrni, a Turkish resistance movement was formed, and this movement had as its strategy to draw the Greeks out of the zone of Smyrni and into the hinterland, and we all know what happened after that. So there's a war, the Greeks leave their zone and they're chasing the German Chetes and the FS and all these guerrillas into past the zone, and they're being drawn into the countryside. And they get to a place called Aydin, known in Greek as Tralles, which was the birthplace of Anthemios and Isodorus, the famed architects of Hagia Sophia during the Byzantine times. It also happens to be the ancestral homeland of my grandfather. And he provides one of the most harrowing accounts of one of the most confronting atrocities of the Greco-Turkish War, the massacre of the Greek Boy Scouts of Aydin by Turkish irregulars, and the discovery of their mutilated bodies after they refused to convert to Islam. Sorry for the graphics, but I think it gives us an understanding of what these people went through. It's not meant gratuitously. General Nider was the Greek general who was in charge of this campaign. Apparently William Lloyd was attached to him, and that's why he was able to get in and report on these events. And it is considered that William Lloyd's account was sufficiently so detailed as to move Sir Robert Baden-Powell, founder of the Boy Scouts, to demand that the Council of the League of Nations take a stance on the massacre. And there's a contemporary report of the massacre of the Boy Scouts at Aydin. And what we know about what happened here was that the warfare around Aydin started by an ambush on the 27th of June 1919 of a Greek patrol by irregular Turkish forces led by Yörük Aliyev at the train station south of Aydin at Malgaç. And there was a fire which was started in Aydin by the Turkish forces in the Greek quarter, and that once they took control of the city, and that spread, causing confusion, causing panic, and then they entered in the morning of the 30th of June, burnt everything down, started killing people. We're looking at about 2,000 to 3,000 inhabitants of this very small town. Wasn't a big place. were robbed, many were killed, women raped, the things that usually happen. A few of them managed to take refuge in the French convent, and they were protected for a while. Now, Boy Scouts, you may ask, why are there Boy Scouts in the middle of the Ottoman Empire, and what are they doing there? Boy Scouts are something which we associate with Australia or England, or the Box Hill Scouts that do the Parelasi once a year, and, you know, bringing up the rear, banging on the drums and being thoroughly brilliant. And there were three groups that were formed in Advocacy because Boy Scoutism was very, very popular. This idea of self-help, of clean air, of learning skills. It was something which had been imported by the British, and people loved it. It really took on. In Smyrni, there were 17 Boy Scout groups, and there were another 46 formed in various parts of Asia Minor. So very, very important, and they took part in religious, athletic, philanthropic activities. In Aidinio, the regional leader of the Greek Boy Scouts was one Nikos Avgeridis, and along with his Boy Scouts and their leaders, they were captured by the Turks and imprisoned in the town hall. And that's him, Nikos Avgeridis. And they were then directed to the shores of the river where one of the Chetes, one of the fighters, one Adnan Menderes, asked Avgeridis to renounce his faith and ethnicity. You know, you still got a chance to save yourself, become a Turk. Avgeridis declined and apparently uttered the words, "Long live Elas." How we know this, I don't know. That's the story. Menderes then removed one of his eyes with the sword. And then he asked him again, "No, you can still save yourself. You've got one eye, but you can save yourself." And he replied apparently in the same manner. So he was skinned alive. And his body was dumped in the river. And then they asked the Boy Scouts, "Do you want to share his fate? Or do you want to change your names and nationalities and faith?" And they said, "No, we don't want to do that." So they were blindfolded, and they were tortured, and they were massacred. 31 children were massacred. And William Lloyd got to Advocacy just after this had happened, and he saw their bodies. And he was lost for words. He was shocked. You know, up until the First World War, there was this idea, this historical narrative among Protestant countries that history is a progression, there's a linearity, you just get better and better. Civilization improves, and then you see these things. And you say, who are we? What are we doing? It makes you question the whole progression of humanity. He starts lobbying and interviewing politicians, attending Paris for the peace treaty, which is going on. Yeah, the peace treaty started in 19, but the sessions kept on going because there was a lot to iron out. So he'd write to them, he would meet them, he would do all these things and say, hey, this is what's going on in Asia Minor. We've got to do something about this. You are trying to determine the fate of these people, but this is what's going on the ground. And there's an Anglo-Hellenic League which is founded in the aftermath of the 1912 to 1913 Balkan Wars in order to counter anti-Greek propaganda in the United Kingdom, and that's active at this time. And they invite him to Liverpool. So he goes to Liverpool in January 1920. That's a map of independent Pontus. And he talks about the atrocities of the Asia Minor Greeks, and his articles, his series of lectures, which he gives, are published in the local press. So in England already, people are beginning to get an idea from someone who's on the ground what's going on. He's also, from what I understand, getting these reports republished in Australia. So Australians are beginning to get an insight as to what's going on in Asia Minor. And he's so passionate as an advocate for the Greeks of Asia Minor that he attracts the attention of the Greek government, with the Greek ambassador to the United Kingdom, Dimitris Kaklamanos, reporting to the Foreign Ministry about one of Lloyd's articles, you know, in dispatches, this is really good, we could really use this guy, and that was published in London's Daily Telegraph. And he suggests that Lloyd be encouraged to report regularly to that newspaper because his dispatches were, according to his estimation, highly influential in moulding public opinion. He was a very good writer. Now, in addition to his advocacy on behalf of the Boy Scouts of Advocacy and writing about the massacres, cozying up to the politicians, telling them what they need to be doing, he was also a very outspoken supporter for the independence of Pontus, hence the map. Kate la République du Pont, the Republic of Pontus, which never actually happened. But it was a prospect that was discussed at the Paris Peace Conference of 1919. It was proposed by a great man, Metropolitan Chrysanthos of Trapezunda. That's Venizelos. There's Chrysanthos. But rejected by Venizelos. Venizelos said, no, we can't do this. It's unworkable, on the grounds that the proposed state would be too far away, indefensible, unable to be assisted. He said, look, we can't commit to this cause because they're too far away, they're too remote, their geographical surroundings, everything else just can't happen. And we know that on a few occasions during the Asia Minor catastrophe, Venizelos actually succeeded in sending a boat up there, and it bombarded, I think, Samsunda. I can't remember. It might have been Samsunda, but really didn't do much damage. It was not easy to get to. So he said, no, let's concentrate on the stuff that we can actually keep and win. And obviously none of that was ever won or kept. So there you go. One would speculate what would have happened if Greece had pushed this. And it's worth looking into this idea of creating an independent Pontus and how that would have worked, because that was something that William Lloyd felt passionately about. We know that on the 8th of January 1918, the President of America, Woodrow Wilson, established his 14 points for a new world order. And point 12 specified that all non-Turkish nationalities, which are now under Turkish rule, as he said, should be assured an undoubted security of life and an absolutely unmolested opportunity of autonomous development. And this meant that the Armenians in the empire and the Greeks went absolutely bananas. You know, if the American president says this is going to happen, we're going to make it happen, it's going to be great, we're going to have our own country, he said so. And then obviously what happened was that these 14 points, while very influential, they informed European thinking in the way that they thought that the post-World War I map should be created as according to nationalities rather than empires. But he was voted down by the Senate, and America never adopted the 14 points, and America opted out of policing post-World War I Europe, which was a problem. And between 1918 and 1919, Venizelos began a process of financial payments for repatriations of Pontic Greeks who had resettled in Russia. Venizelos' view was, let's just get them out of where they are and bring them to Greece because we can't hold on to that. And if those of you who've read Kazantzaki's Zorba, yeah, you'll know that all the things that are going on in Zorba the Greek are happening in the context of the main character actually being charged by the Greek government to go to the Black Sea regions of Russia and collect Pontic refugees, because that's something Kazantzakis actually did in real life. He was asked by Venizelos to go to Georgia and bring Pontian refugees back to Greece. So that's a semi-autobiographical bit. So this is what's going on. There are discussions about creating an autonomous Pontus. Chrysanthos arrives at the negotiations. The British have occupied strategic points along the Ottoman Empire, especially Samsunda they did for a bit, Constantinople and the like. Chrysanthos arrives, says, we want an independent Pontus. Chrysanthos was an amazing man. His history and the things that he did post-war and pre-war are amazing. He actually had a hand in establishing the church here. He was one of the main advisors to the Patriarch who told him, we need to upgrade Australia into an archdiocese. You'll be interested to know. So for some of you, he's to blame for everything. For others, he's a hero. I'll leave that at that. We won't discuss it because I'm getting some dirty looks from some people in this room. Now, he presents an 18-point plan for the creation of a Republic of Pontus, which was supposed to be an Armenian Greek condominium. The reason why is because the Greeks at that stage were not a majority in Pontus. And when we're talking about Pontus, that's the enlarged map of Pontus. The western part of Pontus had already been ethnically cleansed by this stage. During World War I, the Russians moved into Trapezunda in the east and they occupied it up until the time of the Russian Revolution. So the Turks could not go there. They couldn't carry out any genocide during that time. It was protected by the Russians. Western Pontus was not protected by anyone, not occupied by the Russians. So during World War I, that area was systematically cleansed of Greeks. So when Chrysanthos is going to the peace conference and presenting this map and saying, we want this, already half of the population is gone. It's only this bit, okay, which is in peril because the Russians have left and these people are being killed while he's talking, because they have no protection. Now, as I said previously, Venizelos said, no, it's not going to happen, can't happen. Whatever you say, no good. And the head of the Red Cross in Pontus presents a report to the peace conference saying, well, guys, you've got to do something about these people because the situation is very, very bad indeed. There are massacres. They don't appear to be always organised, but these people appear to be fair game to whoever is crossing the region where there are armed bands of Turks or jealous neighbours, whoever, and it's looking bad and very grim. Now, we know that in 1921, a large part of the Orthodox Christian males of Pontus were deported and sent to labour battalions in Erzurum, the old Theodosiopolis, and during this time an ad hoc court of Kurdish independence was set up in Amasya, which was controlled by the Turkish nationalists of Mustafa Kemal, later Atatürk, father of the Turks, and that sentenced notable figures to death by hanging. And we know that this is the Turkish modus operandi. For example, the Armenian genocide began, what they term the official part of the genocide began in 1915, when the Ottomans rounded up the figureheads, the journalists, the leaders, the prukhandes of the Armenian community in Constantinople. You get the leaders first, you hang them, and then you deal with the rest of the population later. Which tactic, I must say, was also followed by the Nazis in Poland. They went after the intellectuals first, the doctors, the priests, the lawyers. Fair enough, you know, Shakespeare said first kill the lawyers, and everyone seems to follow that. But you get the notables first, you leave the people without a leadership, without means of being able to coalesce and organise, and you go after everyone else. That's what they did, with the Armenians and with the Greeks in Pontus as well. Among them was the former member of Ottoman Parliament, Mattheos Kofidis, a very famous, very important man. And basically they were charged with supporting the independence movement in Pontus, and they were killed. Now, William Lloyd becomes aware of these dapper gents here, who are the Pontic Greek Committee of Constantinople. And their job is to advocate for independence. Because remember, at this time, while the war is raging in Asia Minor, Constantinople is occupied by the Allies, which means the Greeks of Constantinople are on tenterhooks. They're enjoying their newfound freedom, but they're wanting to see how long it's going to last for, and they're also wanting to know what they can do for their brothers and sisters in the rest of Asia Minor, being constrained by the Allies who want to have it both ways. They want to have it good with the Greeks, they also want to have it good with the Ottomans and the Kemalists, because they don't know who's going to win. It's one of those situations. William Lloyd apparently joins this group. William Lloyd is influential among them. William Lloyd writes to them, says, don't give up your goal, raise money, create awareness, do whatever you can, Pontus must be free. And then in 1925 he returns to Australia. And the Greeks in Sydney especially greet him with a welcoming committee comprised of the most important, the most famous people of that city. And soon after he enhances his celebrity status, as the historian Hugh Gilchrist says, with a number of claims. He holds public lectures. The Greeks love him. They love him. Oh Lloyd, oh Lloyd, oh Lloyd, oh Lloyd. No, if they could take selfies with him back then, they would have. They couldn't, so they didn't, which is why we've only got one photo of Lloyd that we can show you tonight. But he gives public lectures and he says to people that he had lived in the Near East for 27 years. He tells them how he served with the Greek army, with General Neither between 1919 and 1922, that he saw action in Thrace, that he was in Asia Minor, that he saw the massacre of the Boy Scouts, and that, most astonishingly, that he was the sole surviving member of the Constantinople Committee for the Liberation of Pontus. The only one who survived. Why? Because according to him, and according to the account that he gave, all the other members were eventually rounded up, captured and massacred by the Turks. And then, no, we don't want that one. Why do we want that one? Where are we going? Cuts it. How do we tell us one? Okay. Help! Natos. That easy. No. Τώρα. Talk amongst yourselves. 21. Πριν από αυτό. That one. Ωραίος. Okay. Well, we're back. So, he tells this story how he'd been sentenced to death for smuggling Greek women and children to safety. And he was captured, he was held in some bolt hole somewhere, and that he escaped captivity after 3 weeks on a Greek warship. And that Greek warship was apparently sent specifically to rescue him. And to this effect, he informed the press, "I am at present still under sentence of death, and I have to thank the Greek government that I am still alive today." Now, when you send something for lodgement over in Greece that may never arrive, or it may arrive after 5 years, or you may get your response after 10 years, but if you are in peril and if you're ever in prison and you're serving the Greek cause, a warship will come pretty quickly. 3 weeks is not bad, I think. So he presents himself while he's in Australia as W.A. Lloyd, Knight of the Holy Sepulchre, because, and that was where I was preempting myself, he was knighted apparently by the Greek Patriarch of Jerusalem during the war. We mentioned how he was in Jerusalem for a period of time. And he wrote to the Brisbane Courier in 1926 about this, and here's another recipient of the Knight of the Holy Sepulchre. This is Archbishop Makarios. That's the medal that you get when you are the Knight of the Holy Sepulchre, and that's the Patriarch of Jerusalem, Theophilos. So William Lloyd, Archbishop Makarios are in esteemed company there. Okay, so he writes in the Brisbane Courier to refute claims that King Constantine, who had died 3 years before, had been pro-German. And in his letter, he claims that during the duration of the Asia Minor expedition, he, William Lloyd, had been in close contact with, and I'm quoting his words now, everyone of importance in the Hellenic world. I was with Constantine on the Asia Minor front, and I met him several times in Athens. I discussed the various phases of the war with him often. So this guy is a mover and a shaker. He's not your ordinary journalist. And when he's not recalling his wartime exploits, the dashing escapes, the chivalrous assisting of women and children, the passionate advocacy of the liberation of Pontus, William Lloyd remains a passionate and outspoken supporter of Greeks, both in Greece and in Australia. And in the Bulletin in 1926, he writes against the establishment of a quota on Greek immigration, because at that time there was a discussion, we don't want these greasy Greeks here, we need to put a cap on how many of them are coming, they are a menace, and he's totally against that. He's very pro-Greek, very influential. He also writes to the newspaper The Truth. Anyone remember The Truth? Great rag. And The Truth has a great history because The Truth ended up being bought out by a Greek family. So, yeah, bringing it everything full circle. And he writes to The Truth, defending Greeks against the racist slurs of the time, and he says this, I know the Greek probably better than most of my countrymen, and I have nothing but admiration for his splendid qualities. So there you go. And in the same year, he also writes to the Sydney Morning Herald as former British correspondent in Turkey, denouncing moves to, that's the bulletin, to deport the ecumenical patriarch from Constantinople because the Treaty of Lausanne was being negotiated, but still the Turks were not happy about the fact that they were forced to leave the patriarch where he was, and there were constantly moves and pressures to get him out. So he writes about that. He writes against that. He's passionate in defense of Constantinople. He's still raising awareness of the plight of the Pontians. Where have they gone? What happened to them? There needs to be inquiry, this type of thing. And he provides an analysis as to why, in his belief, the Treaty of Lausanne, which was the final nail in the coffin for the Greeks of Asia Minor, was inequitable, it was not fair, and he explains why. Now, there was one thing I wanted to mention before, which I'd forgotten, and it's just slipped into my mind now, which is this. Remember when we were talking about how William Lloyd is in Aidinio, and he's seeing the massacre of the Boy Scouts, and you remember how the leader of the Boy Scouts was taken by Adnan Menderes and was taken to the river and said, change your faith and renounce your nationality and we'll save you, and then he was tortured, the eyes put out, the rest of it. Who was Adnan Menderes? Does anyone know? Adnan Menderes became the Prime Minister of Turkey. Adnan Menderes was the one who instigated the pogrom of 1955 in Constantinople, when so many businesses were destroyed, when the mob was set upon the Greeks of the city, when tens of thousands of Greeks lost their homes, when so many more had to leave. That was that gentleman. Okay, so there's a prehistory there. Menderes, his surname, is from the river Meandros, which flows through Aidinio. He was a local. That's what they got up to before they became Republicans. Yeah, thought I'd just mention that in passing. Now, William Lloyd dies in December 1926. So he's writing right up until his death passionately in support of the Greeks. And in his obituary in the Greek Herald, of which that is a copy, albeit a small one, an Australian by the name of Edward Parry references his fighting for Greece during the war, his occupation of diplomatic positions, both under the implacable enemies King Constantine and Eleftherios Venizelos. He mentions his dramatic rescuing of the women and children. He mentions his death sentence. He mentions his escape. And I mean, when you look at it, it's a remarkable life. It's high drama. It's a swashbuckling narrative full of emotion and action. And I don't understand why anyone has not made a film of this starring Hugh Jackman. I mean, come on. And amazing that a man of that time, when the Greeks in Australia were hardly known, when in the mind of the Australians and the British and everybody else, the Greeks were either the ancient Greeks or the fustanella-clad Greeks, that he was a man with the sensitivity and the perspicacity to champion the cause of a region so remote in the popular consciousness as Pontus, to advocate for its independence, to advocate for the social welfare of the Greeks living in Asia Minor. And this is a guy in Australia. And the point is that when we are out there trying to raise awareness of these issues, we can use people like William Lloyd to bring the story and ground it in Australia. This is an Australian story because one of you was there trying to raise awareness of this and creating a discourse and a narrative about the genocide here in Australia 100 years ago. It becomes an Australian story, which is sort of akin to what Pontiakias Thea has done in being the instigators of the statue which was set up in Ballarat for George Devine Treloar, who, as you probably know, it was a guy who saved tens of thousands of Pondians from death and starvation by bringing them over to Greece and building them a village. He was an Australian. And there's a statue of him in Ballarat, which, thanks to Pontiakias Thea in association with a few other community groups and the city of Ballarat, is in the middle of the main drag. So you can take people there and say, look, this is your history. This is what Australians do. They're humanitarians. George Devine Treloar actively saves people, gives them a home, gives them food to eat, re-establishes their lives and gives them dignity. And William Lloyd is on the ground reporting about what's happening. And when that happens, and when you have Australians who, save Pondians, then you've got to ask the question, what was he saving them from? Because if the genocide didn't take place, why did he need to save them? Similarly, William Lloyd, if nothing was going on, what did he feel he had the need to report on? These are the salient points which are important. I think that's why we wanted to present this topic tonight about an unknown Australian who really tried to make a difference. Because the whole idea is we can recount all of the massacres, the killings, the barbarities, but after a while that becomes gratuitous. We know it, we become desensitized to it. Why don't we focus on the people outside our own stenokyklo who were onlookers, who tried to do something about it as well, and then grounding it in our reality here in Australia. So that was the purpose of tonight. So I think you'll agree, an interesting story, a fascinating character, and his pro-Greek activism is undisputed. His articles are there to be found in the archives, but as historian Hugh Gilchrist points out, certain aspects of William Lloyd's thrilling life don't actually check out when you scrutinise them closely. The Greek army, which kept, for an official organisation in Greece, the Greek armies kept pretty decent military records. And there's no record of Lloyd's service anywhere. And despite his claims of acting in diplomatic posts on behalf of Greece, there is only one mention of him in Greek diplomatic files, the letter from Kaklamanis to the Foreign Office saying, I'm reading these guys' articles, they're pretty good, we should use him. And he makes absolutely no appearance in British consular dispatches either. So until further research, and I remember speaking about this with Hugh Gilchrist, because he was the person that actually introduced William Lloyd to me before his death, and he was trawling through archives trying to find more things about him, and he couldn't. So until we're able to find more, until evidence is able to back up these claims, we need to treat this guy's life with a bit of a grain of salt, yeah? Take it with a grain of salt and a bit of scepticism about his Baron Munchausen-like adventures. But then the story is this. Even if it turns out that he didn't save refugees, even if it turns out that he didn't have coffee with Venizelos or tried to take a selfie with King Constantine, the fact of the matter is that his articles speak for themselves, okay? And if he invented a whole inner world of action and danger and James Bond-like intrigue, he did it for a good cause. And he did it in order to create the groundwork to create sensitivity in the popular consciousness of the Australians here. Firstly, so they can be pro-Greek and look a bit more kindly on the Greeks living in Australia at a time when they were being treated not so well. But secondly, so he can raise awareness about the people back home who were so downtrodden, so degraded, so stripped of dignity and even their lives. So yes, William Lloyd, ποιος στο διάλογο ήταν ο William Lloyd, είπε ο Νίκος? The answer is, well, we don't really know. And I don't think we ever will. But what a great story. Thank you.
Dean, as expected, a fascinating lecture. It's quite interesting you mentioned Adnan Menderes. I've just recently read his biography, and he actually survived an air crash. Not sure if you were familiar with that in London. And also, he probably provoked the first, let's say, Turkish coup, sort of post-World II, because he did try to overturn some of Kemal's sort of secularist reforms as well.
He did, and he didn't escape the noose, though. He was hanged in the end. Yeah.
Okay, we've got first question that's been sent through to us from Conspiropoulos. Okay, so got a question from Conspiropoulos. Following the election loss of the Venizelos government, did the new Greek government change tact about pursuing recognition of a Pontian Republic?
The short answer is no. It was never a priority. It wasn't something that was ever seriously mooted on behalf of Greece. The place was too remote. The difficulties in supplying an army to get there, all the chaos that was going around made this unfeasible. So short answer, Costa, no.
Okay. Right. Any questions from the floor? Yeah, you need to come up to the mic to ask your question, otherwise it won't be picked up on the broadcast. You're usually an inquisitive lot. Τι πάθατε σήμερα? Σάκη? Ναι.
Ευχαριστώ πολύ, Κώστα, και μιλάω ελληνικά και ξέρεις τους λόγους.
Μα δεν είναι μάρτιος.
Προσθέσαμε και όχι μόνο.
Καλά κάναμε.
Λοιπόν, μου έκανε μεγάλη εντύπωση αυτό που είπες σχετικά με το ότι η ποντιακή γενοκτονία δεν έχει την αποτελεσματικότητα που θα μπορούσε να έχει αν λεγόταν ελληνική γενοκτονία. Αυτό είναι κάτι που νομίζω τα ποντιακά σωματεία και η Ομοσπονδία θα πρέπει να το συζητήσει. Αλλά το βρίσκω ίσως ευκολότερο να γίνει εδώ παρά στην Ελλάδα. Έχω τους λόγους μου, θα ήθελα να ακούσω και τους δικούς σου λόγους, γιατί το να την ονομάζουμε εμείς εδώ ελληνική γενοκτονία και στην Ελλάδα να την ονομάζουμε ποντιακή θα δημιουργήσει προβλήματα. Επίσης θα ήθελα να ξέρω, εκτός από αυτό το λόγο τον οποίο να σπάζουμε, υπάρχουν και άλλοι λόγοι που η δική μας γενοκτονία δεν έχει αποκτήσει αυτά που έχουν αποκτήσει οι Αρμένοι και οι Ασσυριανοί κτλ.
Ναι, να απαντήσω το δεύτερο σκέλος πρώτα, αλλά Για αυτούς που παρακολουθούν μέσω Zoom και ίντερνετ, θα μιλήσω στα αγγλικά, αν δεν σας πειράζει. Οπότε, συγγνώμη γι' αυτό, αλλά εντάξει, μας παρακολουθούν και μικρά παιδιά που λέει ο λόγος. We haven't been able to achieve what the Armenians have in relation to recognition for three reasons. And I always say three reasons, and I have to make up what they are for the sake of the Trinity. But the first reason is this. The Greek government has never pushed it as an issue. It's not part of the policy of the Greek foreign ministry to raise this issue with Turkey. And there are many reasons for that, and it's understandable. When you are dealing with this behemoth, which is so απειλεί την ακεραιότητα, which is, what's the word, threatening your security, and there are only so many things you can do in a day, yeah? There's a Treaty of Lausanne. Treaty of Lausanne says whatever happened, happened, reparations, population exchange on all sides, we're done, yeah? Armenia never signed such a treaty, okay? The Assyrians don't have a country. You said, why have the Armenians achieved stuff? The Assyrians haven't achieved anything because they don't have a country. They're spread all throughout the world and they're still persecuted today. Okay? With us, that's one problem. Problem is it's not an issue that the Greeks have support. The second issue is this, we're a tribal people. The only thing we agree on is that our common ancestors are Pericles, Megalexandros and Kolokotronis. Apart from that, we might as well be our own different countries. We don't work together. Να πω την αλήθεια, we don't really in our heart of hearts care about the Pontian genocide if we're not from Pontus or Μικρά Ασία. For us, it's something that happened to them, and they're somebody else, okay? There's a great book written by a Swedish academic, whose name I can't remember at the moment, recently published, where he talks about the debates within the Pontian community in Greece about this issue. Οι παλαιοί, the survivors, did not want to refer to a Pontian genocide. They didn't want to use the word at all. And the reason why is because they felt that that would prevent their integration στον εθνικό κορμό, that they would not be considered Greeks if they kept on going on about this Pontian thing, the first generation. Second generation started looking at it differently. In Greece, we have, as I said at the beginning, 3 different dates to commemorate what happened in Asia Minor and Thrace, even though the modus operandi, everything else was the same. And that is for political reasons. That is so that politicians can garner votes among the various micro-communities within Greece. It is not for patriotic reasons, it is for internal reasons. And that is something that we shouldn't be susceptible to. The Armenians, from the moment the genocide happened, and remember Armenia was the part of Armenia which remained in Soviet orbit was the only Armenia. Western Armenia was lost, became part of Turkey, everyone left from there. They were killed or deported, okay? From the minute they left there and they went to their countries, that was their passion. And it didn't matter if you're an Armenian from Western Turkey, Greece, wherever, this was their thing. This is their foundation myth, if you like. It's a very old country, first Christianized in 301, the first Christian state, a old people who are connected with Pontos. Mithridates was, father-in-law was Armenian, Tigranes the Great, okay? But this became the thing that united them after they'd lost everything. We didn't have to do that. Εμείς δεχθήκαμε τους Πόντιους, δεχθήκαμε τους Μικρασιάτες, they came, they settled, that was supposed to be get on with your lives. And really, the push to recognise the genocide and talk about it started happening after the first generation of survivors became old and started telling their stories, because originally the focus was on survival. Here in Australia, apart from a few groups and the Pontian groups among them, it's not pushed as an issue. And I remember speaking to an influential member of the community, a great man, a wise man, and saying, no, we've got to do things to recognise the Pontian genocide. And he took me aside and said, no. And I was shocked. I said, why? He said, that's not a priority. Why would you waste the political capital that you have on something that you're not going to get anything out of? What we need the Australian government for is funding, pensions, nursing homes, education, not something that happened 100 years ago. I understand, even though I don't like that interpretation, I understand it and I appreciate it. We don't push it here because we don't believe in it. I mean, we believe in a lot of things. We say a lot of things as Greeks in Melbourne or Australia, but we don't really put our money where our mouth is. That is why we are not as successful as the Armenians, because for them, it's the foundation myth of their new identity. For us, it's something that happened to those people that wear the zip gun dance kotsari. Now, in terms of rebranding the genocide, for me, I understand that up until now we've said Pondian genocide, and I think that can continue within the community, esoterikis katanalysis, but when you want to refer to it outside, in the Anglosphere, that's where you want to use that word, because it confuses people if you're using these words. It confuses the Armenians and the Assyrians. They say, hang on, aren't you one people? What's going on here? And they are more diverse than we are. No, they speak languages that are not mutually intelligible with each other half the time. No, the Assyrians have got 3 different alphabets. They're divided among 3 different religious groups. The Armenians the same. They're a lot more diverse, yet when it comes to this issue, they're one. And the other thing that we don't talk about, which is not answering your question, but a point that I want to make, Kyrie Zafiropoulou, is this. It wasn't just the Armenians, the Assyrians, and the Greeks. There were also the Arabs who were Christian in Syria, especially the Orthodox ones, and the Maronites in Lebanon at the same time. And that's something else we'll talk about another time, who were deliberately starved to death by the Ottomans. 500,000. We don't talk about them either. They're sort of left out of the narrative. And we need to be talking not only Greek, Assyrian, Armenian, whatever, but the Christian genocide, because it was religious-based. It was religious-based. There were other tribes who revolted at the time. If you look at the research, there were even Cherkezi Muslims who were helping the Greek army because they didn't like the Ottomans, which sounds strange, but it happened. But the people that were persecuted because the Islamic view of the world was you're either Muslim or you're not, and if you're not, there's scrutiny, different laws apply, you're a second-class citizen, and that is what enabled them to do that. Looking at you as a second-class citizen enables them to go down that slippery slope and erode whatever protections were under Islamic law and present you as someone who is a threat. So it was a Christian genocide, and these kind of ways of looking at it will help when you are trying to explain to people who are not Greek or who are not familiar with the genocide how this thing happened. I'm not saying get rid of the word Pondi, Pondiaki Genoktonia, esoterica for ourselves. We know what it means. That's great. Out there though, and amongst an increasingly English-speaking Greek community, we need to be inclusive and we need to put things in context. And I think that word sometimes doesn't help.
I think that was more than 3 points, but well said.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, got 1 or 2 more questions coming through. One from Leon. Was William Lloyd a spy?
Was William Lloyd a spy? He was definitely an international man of mystery. Yeah, baby. But we don't know.
I don't know.
We just don't know. Was he a spy? Was he a journalist? If we could get a little bit more information about how he wormed his way and saw these things, then we would say that he probably was a spy. I suspect that he was a spy, because to be able to, if we accept the story on face value, the fact that he was attached to General Neither, that he saw these things, and he could not have not seen these things because some of these accounts are contemporaneous with what happened. Yeah? He probably was a spy. Maybe if left to his own devices, he could have been the Lawrence of Greece. You know, but
well,
who am I to speculate?
There's 2 more parts of this question.
Yeah.
Did he model himself on Lord Byron by any chance? And,
did he model himself on Lord Byron, who slept with his half-sister and who hated the Greeks? Sorry to burst everyone's bubble. Lord Byron hated the Greeks, and he always talked about how annoying they were and how what a cesspool modern Greece was, and he's got some few choice quotes there, you know, keeping the New Zealand motif. Choice quotes about how annoying and how venal and how crappy modern Greeks were. He loved Greeks uncritically, so no, he was not like Byron. Byron ended up in Greece because Shelley told him to go there. He was more interested in creating a republican movement within Italy, but he ends up there and decides it's going to be fun, and gets 400 Suliotes to parade around him in Missolonghi, except that they're annoying all the Missolonghites, so they get disbanded and he has to pay them out, and all these things happen. William Lloyd didn't do any of these. Plus, I don't think, you saw the photo before, I don't think William Lloyd would have looked good in a fustanella.
okay. And I'm not sure how this question came about. Did Prince Philip recognise Greek murders by Ottomans?
I never asked him. Prince Philip recognised the fact that the Greeks tried to kill his father, because his father was condemned to death and he had to flee. Yeah? Prince Andrew had to leave, because Prince Andrew was in Asia Minor fighting in the army and was, he was considered guilty of insubordination. because the High Command were telling him to do one thing, but he had other ideas. And he famously said, I wish that all of the Greeks of Asia Minor had one neck so I could cut it off. He didn't like the Greeks of Asia Minor. He had that Orientalist view that they're degraded, that they're venal, that they're effeminate, that they're not good fighters, and that they're doing more harm than good. He was an interesting guy, as was his son.
I might take one final question before we bring proceedings to a close.
Dean, yes, today's lecture was definitely very interesting, and we learned from it. And I know you mentioned George Trelaw, and we learned from that. And I think it's important that the broader community learns from those stories, because they were both Australians. However, we did manage, though, so far to have recognition of a genocide in 2 states in Australia. So what I'm saying is, in trying all these years, we've managed to do that. I know we haven't been able to get recognition in all the states of Australia. So what, in your opinion, would be the best tackle or the best way to go forward?
Okay. Yeah, we have managed to get the recognition in 2 states. Those states are New South Wales and South Australia. And that was done only, I believe, because there were some very sympathetic politicians in New South Wales who had already been groomed, if I may use the term, by the Armenians. So we were basically riding on their coattails. In South Australia, Greeks are very prominent in public life, so we were able to move that way. Yeah, and we had the Atkinson, I think the guy that moved it in South Australia, who was a Philhellene, and if you buy today's Neos Kosmos, you can see a picture of him with Mr. Tavlaridis and Mr. Iassonidis wearing the zipka. He is, I think, the only Australian politician that's ever worn Pondian costume in public. So this is why you should go out and buy Thursday's Neos Kosmos if you haven't bought so already. It's historical. But apart from that, I'd say this. Yeah, and we've known each other for many years, Litsa, and you're a former president of Pondiaki Estia. I think you're a president of Merina, or you were a president of Merina Pondion Kirion. And
I'll be passing to the younger generation.
Yeah, but don't tell them, because then they'll get excited, and we don't want that this time at night. That's all great, and we've been doing this for a long time. But we know one thing about when a state recognises a genocide, it means nothing, because states aren't in charge of foreign policy. And it's nice, makes us feel good, makes us feel that we've achieved something. But then I'll ask you these 2 questions. Well, I won't ask you, I'll make these points. Bob Carr was the Premier of New South Wales, and Bob Carr passionately spoke about the necessity to recognise the Armenians and tears, and I'm sure he meant it. I think he did mean it. But when he became Federal Foreign Minister, he said Australia doesn't take a stance on this issue. Okay? They can do that. Our august Prime Minister, ScoMo, how good is ScoMo?
Yes.
In 2011, talked about the fact that it is necessary to recognise the Armenian genocide, and now, to use a phrase by a friend of mine from 3ZZZ, Mungas Tistrunga, which is why 2 weeks ago we were out on the street saying ScoMo, ScoMo, speak the truth, and ScoMo, ScoMo, shame on you, with the Armenian community. Again, the Armenian community, which in Melbourne is minuscule, leading the way. We love them. And that's my point. What must we do? We've got to take it up to the federal level. Now is the time. Yeah?
And use the terminology of Greek.
I think so.
Genocide.
I'll say this is my own personal opinion. When Erdogan was slated to come here for the April Anzac Day last year, before COVID hit, that is why I think COVID hit in Australia. God didn't want Erdogan to be here. We made some preliminary discussions among various interest groups here in Melbourne about holding a very respectful protest, against that man being here at that particular time, remembering that it was the landings in Gallipoli which formed the catalyst for the Armenian genocide and what followed with us, and also the fact that in order for the Gallipoli landings to take place, the fortification of the peninsula of Gallipoli entailed removing forcibly 15,000 native Greek inhabitants from their villages, the descendants of which, especially Krithia, live among us here in Melbourne. and most of the Greek organisations we approached were not interested. What does that tell you?
Okay, how do we use the tool of having Australians such as Treloar and Lloyd to promote or push forward?
Well, you'll know from your own experience. You had this great idea, along with some other members of the community, to honour George Divine Treloar.
Yep.
So you went to Ballarat and you had 50 million meetings with the municipal authorities there.
I certainly have.
And you are probably now an honorary citizen of Ballarat because you're up there enough times. And they loved the story. Why did they love the story?
Because
if
he
you
was
had
an
gone there and you
Australian.
said there is genocide and they kill us and it's not nice and justice, they would have said, yeah, great, would you like a cup of tea on your way out?
Genocide did not come into play at all.
It becomes an Australian story.
Yeah.
And it becomes a humanitarian story, because one of the founding myths about the Australian character, it's not a myth, I use the word myth in terms of the way that we see each other, και πώς πλάθουμε την ταυτότητά μας, is that Australians are decent people, humanitarian people, who want to give everyone a fair go and will help someone who's downtrodden. And the history of the Australians around the world reinforces this. Treloar reinforces this. William Lloyd, however fantastical some of exploits may have been in his concern, reinforces this. So then it's not a story that you as an ethnic minority is imposing upon your Anglo Australian friend here. It then becomes his story.
Yeah.
And I think that's the way to go.
Thank you for your time.
Sorry, Dean, I'm just tempted to ask one more question that's come through. Did William Lloyd leave any family behind, and did they continue his pro-Hellenic activities?
His pro-Hellenic activities, well,
his family members.
When would he have had a chance? You know, between saving damsels in distress and embarking on warships, there is no record of a family. There's no record of a family.
Okay. A big round of applause for our speaker tonight. Okay. And just a reminder to come to next week's seminar, very interesting one, the Ottoman perspectives of the Greek Revolution. So, okay, our speaker will be from Greece, and we sort of telecast live at the Greek Centre here. Thank you for coming tonight. And take advantage of the food that's been provided in the back. We don't want it to go to waste.